There is so much freedom in being anonymous.
Welcome to AMI Audiobook Review, the weekly podcast where we chat all things audiobooks. I'm your host, Ramya Amuddin, with co-host Jacob Szymanski and technical producer Nasreen Abdel-Majid. Jacob, you read today's quote. It is from the memoir that we are going to spend at least the next 25 minutes talking about, which is The Woman in Me. Why did I pluralize that? I don't know. Maybe a bunch of us
The women in me?
The women. The multiple women in me. No.
That's a very
woman.
different meaning.
I know. It's a very different
But
memoir.
no, this quote, it doesn't seem like too much on its own, but it's who said it that really makes it powerful to me. It's said by Britney Spears in her newest memoir, The Woman in Me.
Yes. And that is what we're going to talk about, at least for the first half of the episode. Karen McKay and Theresa Power from the Center for Equitable Library Access are joining us. And it's going to be a full-fledged book review, people. So if you want to pause now, read the book, and come back so you can take part in the conversation, do so. Also, we have Aamer Khan joining us later in the show. He's got 3 books and 3 authors that have piqued his interest, that he's read either the books or want to add to his reading list from this past month. And speaking of CELA, let's go skim through the homepage with the 3 featured titles, and then we'll get to our review conversation. So here are the 3 featured titles at CELAlibrary.ca. And as I said, it's the Center for Equitable Library Access. The titles there are 19 Steps by Millie Bobby Brown. This is a family stories title. Doppelganger by Naomi Klein. And this has or focuses on social issues. And the last one is Reykjavik, a crime story by Ragnar Jonasson. And this is a mysteries and crime stories that Theresa brought up in a past recent conversation. Theresa Power and Karen McKay. Karen McKay is the communications manager at CELA, and Theresa Power is the content and access librarian. So you both are back. Thank you for coming back. It's November.
Welcome back.
Hello, hello. Thank you. It's nice to be back.
Yeah, and the time is flying. This is like our 11th conversation of the year because we only join us once a month. We're talking about The Woman in Me. This is a Britney Spears memoir. I can't remember when it was released, but about a week ago, Theresa?
Yeah, about a week ago.
And it's getting a lot of press for obvious reasons. It was getting a lot of press before it came out, and now it's out. It was just under 6 hours as an audiobook. It is now available on the CELA collection through the Bookshare option. So if you're signed up for Bookshare through CELA, then you will have access to The Woman in Me. Who wants to start with first impressions? Who's rearing to go? Nobody? Jacob, not even you?
It's like in elementary school when there's an oral presentation. Nobody wants to be first.
Nobody wants to be first. Okay, fine.
I'm kind of speechless, I have to say, in a way. Yeah.
Let's talk about the before and after. Okay, let's start with the before around the table. Who was highly anticipating Britney Spears or highly following Britney Spears through her career, through all the stuff that was going on with her? There's a lot to follow about Britney. So, Jacob, starting with you. How much did you care before the memoir?
Not at all. Like, not whatsoever. All I knew about Britney Spears is that she had some sort of weird conservatorship going on, and that people on Instagram and socials were talking about free Britney. I'm like, what, is she in prison or something? And I mean, that's not far off from the truth, honestly. But as far as her career goes, no, I didn't really care too much. Although I do like her music now.
Oh, now?
Yeah, but I only heard of this memoir when Theresa sent an email not even a week ago.
Oh,
and
okay.
I cranked it out in like 2 sittings. And I have pretty positive thoughts on this memoir, honestly.
Okay, good. Karen, you next.
I was not a fan before. She came into popularity when I was raising young kids, and so I didn't really pay a ton of attention. I was more in the kid music genre at that point, and I wasn't really anticipating the release of this memoir. I only know about her based on sort of what anybody in this culture would know about her. She's pretty famous, so so I know some of the things similar to what Jacob mentioned about the conservatorship and some of her appearances on music videos and things that made a big splash, but never followed her. Don't have a lot of the pop cultural references that were relevant for her particular early career. So the book was interesting from that perspective.
Okay. And for me, I followed her music a little bit, just whatever was hit singles, knew a lot about the conservatorship because I was just intrigued by what exactly was going on, but I was only hearing about things afterwards, right? So, there's several like
Right.
documentaries and things that are out there where people have published this is what's been going on with Britney. So I was getting kind of the after wrap ups and summaries of what was going on, but I mean the last 2 years I'd say I paid more attention to Britney than I have in the last 20. And Theresa, you have probably the most thoughts about this. So where were you before
I
the memoir?
Yeah, so I mean, when her first music video came out, Baby One More Time, and the music video was her in school in like a school uniform, and she talks about doing this music video too
Mm-hmm.
in the audiobook. I was in high school, so I was like the perfect age target audience for Britney Spears. And I was into Backstreet Boys, I was into NSYNC as well. Like this was for me, for kids my age, right? So
Yep.
Hmm.
I grew up knowing her and really enjoying her music, enjoying pop music in general. And yeah, kind of followed her throughout her career. Like her age and my age were only a couple years off from each other. And yeah, I basically have sort of followed her throughout her career, not necessarily always music wise, but definitely following her through everything that has kind of has happened in her life. Yeah.
Hmm.
I think it says a lot about her position in culture that, at least what Karen and I think you, Ramya, to a certain extent, that all we really remember of her, all we really know of her is her controversies,
Yep.
like her shaving her head
Hashtag
and
free
the
Britney.
conservatorship and that infamous VMA performance back in the early 2000s. She is more controversy than celebrity at this point.
Yes. And so whatever it was, the impressions that we had of Britney, or lack of, I guess, for some of the audience going into the book, there is a lot that came out from the book. Do you think it's fair to say that a lot came out that we didn't know about? Or is it just that we wanted to hear it straight from Britney?
I think for me, like there was definitely a lot that I didn't realize was happening behind the scenes because, what we get from the public is very much like the TMZ sensational. She was, carrying her child in her lap when she was driving and she ran over someone's foot. And there was definitely a perspective, her perspective, I think, missing in context for like what was really going on behind the scenes. If we, believe what she says, basically. But so I think for me that was really missing because I know when, there was a lot happening and she had shaved her head, and from an outsider's point of view, it looked very alarming. And then this conservatorship kind of came along, and it seemed like for me, I was like, oh, I'm like really relieved there's somebody looking after her because it looks like she needs a lot of help. And not really knowing actually a lot about like her growing up and her father's alcoholism, and just like I think just like the toxic environment that she grew up with, and honestly how uh formidable, I think, or what an impression the way that she grew up had, I think, on her and her with the way she lived her life, and I think even like her development as a person. It's for me like those were all things I think that were, that are missing from the headlines, that I really appreciated reading about.
Well, Teresa, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Since you followed her career for a long time and you've been following her, do you remember what the sentiment was at the time when the conservatorship first started back in 2008? Like, did people see it as a good thing for her? Because if that was the case, that's really interesting looking back on it now.
I know for me, yeah, I think that I thought it was a really good thing, and that's because it was really positioned against like the head shaving and being, carted off from her house under like a 5150 hold or whatever that's called in the United States. Like certainly the way that it was positioned in the headlines is like, yes, it's a good thing because someone can now be in charge because it looks like she can't be in charge of things herself for sure. And I think that many people probably thought that way as well. Like I would definitely call myself someone who has like followed her for her career, but maybe like diehard fans saw something different. I mean, I think they were very much the people behind the that Free Britney movement and saw something maybe that I didn't necessarily see, who saw the conservatorship as a real negative.
I'm I had many moments during this read that I felt Brittany was still so apologetic for being vulnerable.
Mm.
And you know, there was a lot where she was like, "I'm sorry. I know that this sounds crass, or maybe this is extreme to say, or you might think this is crazy or untrue," but like she was very apologetic still. And I think that it's coming, the reason why I was noticing it a lot is I assume that, and I'm not saying I rightly or wrongly assume, but I just assume I go into memoirs thinking, okay, people are at a place where they are ready to share. And especially when it's celebrities, and especially when there's history uh, that celebrities have tried to, either escape from or tiptoe around or whatever the case may be. And so hearing this tone from Brittany, that she was still very like, I'm not yet okay. I'm not yet at a place where I feel like I am fully myself again, or fully healed, or fully whatever it is. Um, it felt tender, it felt very like, are you sure you want to put this stuff out there now? Even the parts where she was like near the end, where she was like, I don't know if my family will read this, and I haven't talked to them for so long, so I'm not sure what their reaction is going to be. It sounded like she was still having this internal conflict of whether it was okay or not for her to release this. Did anybody else get that?
Yeah.
Mm,
I definitely picked up on that. The whole thing for me, not sort of having lived um, through all of this with Brittany in real time, it felt. I'm trying to say this nicely. It felt juvenile. It didn't feel as introspective as I would expect most celebrity
mm,
memoirs, especially with somebody with a history like she's had, to be. Like she still feels to me um, that she needs caring for, and
yes.
that she's missing somebody in her life to say, do you want to think about this from this perspective or that perspective? And like Theresa, I remember having a conversation online with a group of women in an online forum, um, just after she shaved her head, and we were all young moms, and we were talking about what seemed to be lacking in her life. And it was that thing. It was somebody that was actually looking out for her best interest. And that's a theme that runs throughout this book.
Mm,
And I think that's still the case right now. And I think even at, what is she, 41 now? Um, I don't think that she's matured and grown to the point that I would hope for her.
mm,
And I found that interesting that that was sort of hinted at in um, the tweet or the post or whatever that Justin Timberlake put out about it. Just that, he was hoping for growth for her. I can't remember the specifics, but um, I was um, I was
Mm.
initially kind of disappointed with the book, to be honest, because it just felt like a day-to-day recounting of her life. And a lot of the stuff that I read, I don't know why, but it felt like I already knew it, or maybe I had assumed it. Like it,
Mm,
not the specific details, but sort of the themes about, growing up in a dysfunctional family and being very male oriented in her life. There's a lot of aspirations that come out in this book about, she talks a lot about powerful women that she admires and that she is learning from them and that sort of thing. But um, there's not sort of a deep reflective part of that about, how she's going to empower herself. And I, as she's saying that, I'm thinking, if you were truly empowered, I don't know that you'd be putting this book out in this format right now.
right,
So similar kind of feelings as to what you had, Remy.
right. And Jacob, you wanted to comment on this as well?
Yeah, I I was wondering if memoirs get a pass for being blandly written just because the person who's writing them has a particularly interesting story to tell. And I think we can all agree that Brittany here has a absolutely bonkers story to tell, but it is I did have my concerns with the book in that it wasn't particularly well written. It was very raw and somewhat came out, I'd argue, a little too early. Like, I feel like her story isn't over yet, right?
Hmm.
Like, I feel like if this came out 5 or 10 years from now, maybe it would have been very different, especially in her approach and how she saw herself. Because let's remember, like, the conservatorship ended in 2021. That's not a lot of
It's
time
so
to
recent.
process all
Yep.
of that, right? It's very recent. But a question I could pose to you guys: do you think having a particularly good story can kind of carry a memoir?
Well, clearly it does, right? Clearly, we're not going
In
into
this
this
case, yeah,
thinking this is going to
absolutely.
exactly. And not just in this case, but any case. Who's the supermodel memoir that you just read, Jacob?
Oh, Emily Ratajkowski.
Okay, so even in that story, and I have no familiarity with her, okay, so I'm not going to go into that, but I'm saying just understanding that this memoir is about this woman and kind of a tell all of the industry, or with Britney Spears, a tell all of her life, just her piecing the puzzle together. Um, I think that, yeah, a story can most definitely carry a memoir, and whether or not we're interested in or we're grabbed by the writing style is something else completely, I think, because some people are amazing writers. Some people are not so great writers, but their story will carry it. And for me, I'm always just looking for whether or not the writing style was great. I'm always just looking for what the intention is, and I think that's why even with this memoir, even though it kind of sits at a lukewarm place for me, with how she told it, what she told us, and where she is when she wrote this, all the things that we've already pointed out, I still think that the intention for her was to get this story out now. And that sits highly with me. I will compare this to when Demi Lovato, a couple of years ago, came out with a mini series on YouTube, I think.
Hmm.
Anyways, she came out with a mini series. I felt very similarly when I watched that. It was supposed to be kind of a memoir-ish thing of everything that's going on in her life, who she is now and where she is, and all the kind of dirt that she's wanted to expose people out on and all this other stuff. And I still felt the same way. I'm like, you're too young. This is coming out and
Yeah,
you're still so
yeah,
vulnerable to criticism. And, lo and behold, she comes out and she struggled just from the content that she released because of all the backlash. And I'm thinking it's similar to Britney, but why do people release memoirs in this way at these times for themselves? Do they get feedback from people not to do so, or why do they do it anyway? Um, it's hard, but it is a huge exploration.
sometimes it felt like it was part of her healing
It
process,
is, yeah. It
right? It
should
was
be.
more of a personal thing for her than a money-making endeavor.
Like a public diary entry or something.
Yes.
My hope for her is that, the next 30 or 40 years of her life are not memoir worthy, that they're
Mm,
boring, and that she, you know, is able to grow and to find the companionship I think that she so desperately wants, and like lives her life, because she, the audiobook really gave me perspective because, as a kid, as a teen, you're just like, it's great, like music videos, albums, one after another. And in reality, she compacted a lot of content,
Mm.
a lot of music time in a very short period of time, right? And then she was trying to take a break, but she didn't really. She had children. And then it was 13 years of conservatorship and a Las Vegas residency that was repetitive, right?
Yeah.
So, like, there was her actual, like, career time and the time where she was creative was what, maybe like 4 or 5 years or so. Like it wasn't actually all that long.
No.
So I can see. I'm trying to think of like what a future memoir would be from her.
Is she going to come up with a book like later on saying like this is the real memoir?
I
Right.
don't know. Maybe.
Hopefully she comes out with something more introspective. I was thinking as I was reading or listening to this book, it's similar to the kind of concerns I had when Prince Harry came out
Yep.
with his book.
Oof.
That a lot of this
Yeah.
stuff should be said on a therapist's couch, not in a book.
Exactly.
And I was thinking, she's dedicated to her boys and she's talked about her boys in the book. And I'm thinking, oh, I don't know that I would want my kids to hear this from me
Yeah.
at this stage in my life. But what I wanted to say is that I think that the real value of this book, I have to say I didn't love the book, but I think the real value of the book is the conversations that people are having around the impact of the media and the
Mm.
paparazzi and the patriarchy
Yes.
on Britney and how she
Absolutely.
was set up to fail,
Yes.
Yep.
right? Like I think that that's where the value from this book will come from a cultural perspective, is that it just reinforces that
Hmm.
there's still so much work to do and that there are real humans behind these
Absolutely.
persona that are out in the media, and that that not all of them, I mean, there are some really strong women that are able to sort of hit back, for lack of a better word. Brittany clearly, she's too tender.
Mm.
I don't think she'll step into that role for a long time. But that's why we need to have this
Hmm.
conversation, is that people need protection. She was failed by pretty much everybody in her life.
It sounds like it. Yeah.
Um, yeah, and the media made money off that, which is just
I
horrible.
don't know who I'm more angry at. Her mother. I think that, like, a mother daughter relationship is quite special, and um you you look up to your mother or a mother figure to kind of guide you, through these
Yeah.
things. And her mother was drinking with her as a preteen, and I was just
Yeah.
really shocked by that. And it seemed like her mother wasn't there. Now, maybe not to put the burden all on her shoulders. Both of her parents were sound dysfunctional together. Um, but for me, like, a theme here really is like how also, like, the men in her life exploited her, and it's terrible. It's really it really upsets me to read that. And I think, I've been talking on and on with people about, like, Justin Timberlake. And
Mm.
for me, like, he really stands out because this isn't the first time that he's been in this position where he's been able to exploit and use a situation involving another woman to boost his own career and his own persona
Mm-hmm.
and his revenue. And that is bad. And he clearly does not get it. Like, I think in that other instance, he bowed down to pressure from other people to apologize and to say that he recognized
Oh
the
yeah.
difference in that situation.
Oh,
And,
it
like,
was.
and
Sorry. Finish your thought.
no,
Yeah.
and it's the same thing here again that he has done. It's just he did it earlier in his career.
Mm-hmm.
And now, like, it's it really because he's also like contemporary, right, to Britney Spears, so like was really into NSYNC as well growing up, and as any young kid does, like holds these people up to a different pedestal and reveres them and loves their music, and they're all famous and stuff like that. And like, just thinking about that other instance with Justin Timberlake, I really didn't think much of him then, and I think absolutely nothing of him now after reading the memoir here and her experiences with him.
Well, it crushed me when when Brittany talked about, well, when he outed me as being sexually active, I thought, good, he did the dirty work for me, because why
Oof, yeah.
does the world believe that I have to be a virgin still? And I thought, you're so vulnerable in saying that, but the way that that paints a light on how easily she is persuaded that people are doing the right thing for her, or that
Hmm.
she has no control over her own
Hmm.
image and her own reputation. And there were so many examples of that,
Oh yeah,
so many, where she just like, okay, I guess this is
yeah.
what's happening.
Like with
I tried, but I had no choice.
Kevin Federline, like he basically married her and then used her to try and boost his own career, and she was
His own
like,
career.
"Yeah, I'm
I
want
guess you
him
got to
to
support my
have,
husband.
yeah, I
Yeah,
want him to have a good career or whatever," and it's like he's he's like
yeah.
ghosting you. He's like
Clearly,
clearly
she didn't even
ghosting
know he
you.
was a father in weeks into the relationship. Just like, oh, he
Yeah,
was giving me the love that I wanted.
yeah, and
It,
for me, like listening to that just really painted a whole different picture about how he's positioned himself in the public, and having not ownership, custody of those kids.
mm,
And then you look at like that relationship early on with his kids and
hmm
with the mother of his children, and you just like,
yeah.
again, you're like, oh, like there's definitely like a media kind of spin to something, and the reality of it was actually quite different.
Yeah.
Something that really was hard to read for me was knowing that Britney was constantly in tune with the news and the news cycle and what was going on. Like she had people coming up to her and telling her what
hmm
people were saying in the media. She was reading the magazines and knew everything that people were saying about her at any given time. So it's not like she was oblivious to all these things. She was fully aware what the conversation was around her. And
Yeah.
how do you handle that? As what was she like in her early 20s during the peak of her career?
hmm
It's incredible that she went through all that stuff, which the entire story here, sometimes it's hard to believe it even happened.
Yeah. Because there's such a gap between who we know as Britney Spears, the performer, like what she means to people as a performer, um, her strength, her creativity, like what she brought to the music scene, the performance scene, even during that time in Vegas during her residency and all of it. And her fan base is so huge; she's making bank. Um, but there's such a huge gap between that and what she's actually going through, right, in her personal life. And I think that because there were so many characters who played a role in keeping a lot of the stuff behind the scenes, um it does feel like unbelievable that we're reading about this and somebody going through this in real life. We're wrapping up, guys. Final thoughts?
I think one thing that we didn't talk about, just in wrapping up, is the narration by Michelle Williams, which I think is quite something special to the book.
Yes.
I think
Hmm.
it's very interesting that she did it. To me, she brings this kind of protective voice to the book, that
Mm,
Brittany never got from like her own family members or her own partners in her life. I mean, she approaches this book as a mother, and I think that shows in the way that she narrates.
Teresa, what you just said is probably the most powerful, like it brought out the most powerful emotion that I've experienced since reading the book, because I couldn't put it into words, but there was something about why it fits so perfectly that Michelle was the one to have read this book. Because sometimes you think, like, why wouldn't she have read her own book? That's just ridiculous. But you're so right. It fit so well. I never questioned it from the very beginning. And I think it's exactly what you've painted here. She was taking this, like taking Britney under her wing this way. Oh my God. Karen, Teresa, thank you so much. We always appreciate talking to you. And when we get into book reviews like this, it's always such an insightful conversation. And we'll chat with you in December.
Sounds
Wonderful. Have a great
wonderful.
week.
Thank you. Teresa Power, Karen McKay from the Center for Equitable Library Access. We're going to take a quick break and come back with Aamer Khan, our audiobook worm. He's going to share with us why these following three authors have left an impression or piqued his interest in some way: Lee Child, Patrick Stewart, and Tan Tuan Ing. We'll be right back on AMI Audiobook Review. Welcome back. This is AMI Audiobook Review, the weekly podcast where we chat all things audiobooks. And we're back with the audiobook worm himself, starting off November with Aamer Khan. And Aamer, you usually pick three. We've been used to you picking three authors, but it's not always the case. Three books, some kind of theme that ropes in three elements together. And today we have three authors that we're going to feature. You want to tell us how you chose these three authors, who they are, and how they all connect back?
Sure, yeah. As per usual, there's no real connection between the three. Mostly they're occur sort of organically when I'm randomly looking through things. And one of the things I did recently was look through the New York Times bestseller list for the last couple of years to see what novels I may have missed or what was interesting and what people were reading for bestsellers. So one of the things I came across was a book called Blue Moon by Lee Child of the Jack Reacher series. And the Jack Reacher series has been very popular these days with the new Amazon Prime series coming out along with that series. So I thought I'd take a read of that, and that was book number 24 of the Jack Reacher series.
Oh.
So I know a lot of folks have asked me, like, what's it like to, read a book out of series, or can you, and what it's like, especially a long-standing, very popular series. So I'm like, you know what, I'm going to read this book and see if, see what happens. The second book, I was speaking with a friend, and they let me know that Patrick Stewart, Sir Patrick Stewart, the actor and famous all-around actor in general, has published his memoir recently. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about that. I haven't started it myself, but I think those of us that have been influenced by Patrick Stewart would be fascinated to read about him. And the last book I came across with an author interview themselves on National Public Radio or NPR. Tan Tuan Ing is his name, and he was talking about a island called Penang, which is off the coast of, which is Malaysian, but off the coast of the mainland, and the books that he's written about that particular geography, which I thought would be fascinating to talk about.
Look at this. Even just the way that these books end up in your life, so diverse. Not all recommendations, not all heard from a friend.
Seriously.
Not all heard on radio, right? You'd have to checkbox all three.
And even the genre, right? I mean, so we have action in the form of Jack Reacher, and then you have memoir in the form of Patrick Stewart, and, historical fiction in the case of Tan Tuan Ing. So, yeah.
Yeah, variety
Excellent.
is the spice of life, and Amer's life is
Right?
spicy.
Yeah, we got to learn.
It's a great way to live.
Obviously, we want to talk one at a time. So, you want to talk Lee Child and the Jack Reacher series first?
Sure, yeah. This book is called Blue Moon. Like I indicated before, it was on the New York Times bestseller for quite some time. And it's a very action-packed book. But it's not just action. Lee Child, part of what makes the DNA of the Jack Reacher series is that he's a student of human behavior and predictability, which gives an element of fascination and interest to the novels. The main character, Jack Reacher, is a former Army military policeman, and sort of the way they structure his character is that, the military police don't have a whole lot of resources, but they need to get the job done, so to speak, with fewer resources, and they're usually dealing with much more dangerous people than your average police because everybody they are arresting are pretty much military. So he has a special set of skills, and he was particularly good at it. But he's left the army, and he's sort of trying to see what America is all about and drifting from one place to the other. So it's a very much alternative lifestyle piece for Jack Reacher himself. Most of his life has been in the military and going overseas from place to place. He's seen pretty much all around the world except America itself. So he wants to sort of drift from one city to the other. And a lot of the novels basically have the geography or setting of a different city in the United States and the different sort of troubles he gets into or tries to help people out of.
So why book 24? Why would you start there?
Like I said, I was always curious because I do enjoy some long-standing series like the Stephanie Plum novels or the Eve Dallas novels, and I saw this one at Book 24, and people have asked me quite a bit in terms of what it's like to read a book out of order, and my usual answer is, well, I don't know, I've never done it before. So I wanted to give this one a shot and see how I felt about it in terms of, am I going to be feeling like I missed something from before? Am I going to
Right.
feel like going back and reading book one? Am I going to be totally lost? I think that was my greatest fear of, like, especially at book 24. I mean, like, there's so much backstory. I mean, are they going to be referencing characters I don't know and scenes and things from before? But it was actually really well done. And I think for the most part, authors who have long-standing series, they will sort of hint at previous books, but it won't be to the point where you feel lost. And the books really can stand on their own. And definitely, book 24, it does. There's no feeling of loss. I did enjoy the book, which is why I went back and read books 1 through 7 again. Um, and
Hmm.
just like with a lot of other series, some of the books are very similar to book 24, and other books are completely different.
Good authors will, when they either write like long series or really long books, they will reiterate points to like remind readers of
Mm.
certain facts. And I'm hoping that he does this in this series where he
Well
reiterates
enough that you
facts
could pick
well
it
enough.
up at
Yeah,
book
at book
24.
24. Yeah, exactly. Like, are there, other than the titular character Jack Reacher, like, are there characters that are present in all 24 books?
I doubt it. Well, I can say definitive no. In book 24, I don't think there were any characters from books 1 through 7. So a lot of I mean, part of the sort of ethos of his character is that he's a loner. So there will be
Mm.
sort of callbacks to previous situations and things and people, but again, he's not in one place and he doesn't have a group of friends, so it's almost easier for the author not to do that in terms of building characters that are sort of throughout.
I'm wondering if you're going to check out the TV show. Why or why not?
I may. I mean, I tend not to, just because they tend to go in different directions, and again, just by the medium, it goes in a different way. And especially for a book like this, where a lot of the interesting part is not just the action, but the thought process of the character, it's really hard to put that into screenplay. And the other sort of action or political dramas, like Tom Clancy books, have been adapted quite well into movie or onto screen, but
Mm-hmm.
you lose that sort of element of, okay, part of what makes this author great is the thought process that's going on inside the character's head. And unless you have like a 7 hour voiceover narrated movie, that's not going to happen, right?
It's not meant to,
Yeah, yeah,
right? It's gonna take the physicality
yeah.
and I guess the plot aspect and put it into film and TV show. And apparently Lee Child is the executive producer for this
Mm.
series. So there's more to it than just, take it and adapt. He has a history. Two of his other books were turned into films, etc., etc. So I don't know if it's just captivating stuff that ends up this way.
Captivating stuff, and I think with screen and that particular medium, there's other things that can be done, like cinematography and things which, again, from a book perspective, don't translate all that well. I mean, even for those of us who love human narration, I mean, there's such a difference in terms of, you can do so many things with just the human narration part of it that you can't
Hmm.
do with synthetic. And it's the same with screen. There's certain visual effects, or certain actors can really lend themselves to different things that are maybe beyond what the book has.
I'm always curious about people who can get into long series. I just don't
Hmm.
have the loyalty. I've never been able to pick up, investigative series or series of any kind, and stick to it 24 books in, or I know that's not what happened to you. I'm just saying.
Hmm.
And also, even with TV shows, shows run long. We're in season 11, season 12, and we got diehard fans, and we got me going, oh, I stopped at season 6. Like, how did you guys keep going? So I'm curious about, number one, the consistency from the author's end of being able to write books on books on books in the same series. Do you feel like it's done well, either point of view, first person perspective, characters as Jacob brought in, or is there a way to kind of keep it fresh, Amr? Because this is not the first time you've talked about just like binging through an author's series.
Yeah, I think it depends on people's different sort of tolerance levels and interest levels on certain things. I mean, I remember when,
We've established that. I
yeah,
have
yeah,
no
no,
tolerance.
and for certain things, right? Like I remember Prison Break, which was a TV show for a long time, and Prison Break was a show about a guy who was in a prison, and I think that was for the first 2 or 3 seasons, and then they break out of that prison, and you're like, okay, this is done, and then
Now what do we do?
yeah, and
Yeah.
then the other brother gets put into prison for the next following season. You're like, wait, I've seen this
Rinse,
before. I don't
repeat.
understand. And they did it, I think, 3 times with 3 different prisons and 3 different locales, and I was just like, I can't do this. Like I saw the original one. I'm good.
Mm.
But other people loved it, and the series definitely kept going. So I think it depends on how the authors adjust the formula if they have one. I mean, the Eve Dallas
Mhm.
series, which I really enjoy, is a very investigative police procedure, very formulaic. But the way that Nora Roberts writes it, it's new, it's fresh, it's a different angle, and I still enjoy reading it, even though I think I'm in the 20s or 30s now in terms of the series number.
And those are short books, right?
Sure. I mean, they're usually under 9 hours. Some of them get longer, like around 12.
Yeah, okay.
And Lee Child
Reasonable.
also does not do too much in terms of beleaguering the point. And some authors, like Lee Child, have sort of multiple climactic moments. So it's not just sort of an even bell curve of, okay, this is the journey and this is the high point. Tend to peak out one or two at least. So a
Mm.
lot of people like that as well.
I'll add that for long books and long series, for certain people, I think it's just a known commodity. It's just more of a good thing. If you liked
Yeah.
books 1 through 7,
Yeah,
there's a good
fair.
chance you'll like books 8 through
Mm. It's
240. I don't know how many
familiarity.
there are.
Yeah, and a lot of times the characters grow on you, right? So, Jacob, to your earlier point, I mean, a lot of these long-standing series start to introduce other characters, and it's almost like following a family, where okay, yeah, I'm not just reading the book for the main character, but I'd like to see this person again or
Right.
that person again and see how they grow.
Yeah, definitely. I know that for you at least, Amr, you've picked up books, new recommendations or book club books, and then go back into something like the Eve Dallas series. So definitely that familiarity is there.
Absolutely.
What about this book by Sir Patrick Stewart?
So, as I mentioned, I haven't read it yet. I just took a quick look at the synopsis, but I mean, he's been an actor for I think 60 years,
Wow.
which is a very long time. I mean, his name is Sir Patrick Stewart, so he is knighted as well for his work. And everything from Star Trek to his original Shakespearean experience in terms of being a Shakespeare actor. He's been on Broadway. He's done so much, and influenced so many different generations. And I think the part that made me smile the most is that the audiobook version is available on CELA, and it's human narrated by him. So I was really pleased with that. A lot of us do enjoy his voice, his delivery. He has a certain way of projecting his voice, which I think a lot of us enjoy, and has done himself well in his career.
What about the memoir? Because you haven't read it yet or
Mm-mm.
listened to it yet, and I'm wondering what it is that brought it. Remind us again how you found this.
A friend recommended it to me,
Okay.
and I believe it's about 18 hours, so I don't think it's going to be a short read. I mean, again, he's been in the business for over 60 years, so I wouldn't expect it to be a short book. I have seen interviews with him and seen sort of documentaries about his life before as well, so I am still very interested in reading this memoir and seeing how um, his career developed. I think a lot of it has to do with the friendships he developed too. A lot of people sort of thought that his current sort of friend circle just sort of he had from the beginning, which he didn't. A lot of people he met through different movies and different sets along the way. And I think the other part of the story that really speaks to me is humble beginnings for him. I mean, his father was a paratrooper in the British Army. I mean, he wasn't sort of a dynasty from a long line of actors or something.
Isn't it interesting how we go into celebrity memoir celebrity memoirs without knowing exactly what we're getting into writing wise? Like, we don't trust them. They're not authors.
Exactly.
But we
Hmm.
go in and we're like, your story or this part of you interests me enough that I am willing to sit through a book or just go in
Yeah,
and check you out.
I
Right,
think
and you don't know if they're going to be a good author or not. Like you have no clue. All you know
Yeah,
is the
you know if the book's
things
going to
that
be
they're known
great.
for, right? You just know that
yeah,
he's been an actor
yeah.
for all
Exactly.
this time. Was he just going to talk about Star Trek? Like, no, I
Yeah, like, fingers crossed you can write about it.
Well, I think
yeah,
the
you really
the
don't know what you're getting into.
I,
No.
I think the better of the celebrities know that they haven't written a book before and get some good help to do it.
Oh yeah,
um,
you would hope so.
and I think for the most part they know how to entertain an audience, especially if they've sort of banked on the audiobook part. I mean, in the book club we read Will by Will Smith, and I think just by reading it we know that from go he was like, okay, this is going to be an audiobook and I'm going to entertain my audience, and he does it rather well.
Come a certain point of success and longevity, I'm sure these people like Patrick Stewart and Will Smith have people around them begging them to write a memoir. People will just read anything. Well, when these
Yes,
people are as interesting as they are.
Yeah, and I
yes,
think it takes, uh, you know, some selection process on their behalf to make sure they are choosing people they would be satisfied with and how they want their stories told. One of the sports memoirs I've read by Andre Agassi, a famous tennis player, and he actually never graduated high school in the traditional sense. So I mean, you're okay. So I'm going to read a book, a memoir from a guy who
Hmm.
didn't graduate high school, but again, he had the good sense to hire a Pulitzer Prize-winning author to help him, and it's an excellent memoir.
think it's called Seriously, I'm Kidding. It's the memoir by Ellen DeGeneres. And yes, this is before all the canceling of Ellen DeGeneres. I read this book and I was really looking forward to it because I thought she's funny, she's brilliant. I really enjoy her shows and her personality there. And so this memoir must be a very close reflection of that. But then the writing style that was chosen was so awkward for me. Like, it didn't feel like Ellen talking. It wasn't, monologues and her recounting her life or inside scoops and tea. It was done in this very strange kind of maybe poetic. I don't know what the heck this was supposed to be, but it's done where the style is not casual. And Ellen is one of the most casual comedic persons I, see this way. So I was
So,
like, I don't know what to do with this memoir.
were these stories told from a first person perspective? Like, was it meant to
It
be
was first
like
person.
presented like she was writing it, but it just didn't come off as her?
That's a really good question.
Mm.
It wasn't even written as if, like, yes, she was presenting it, and yes, it was first person, but it wasn't stories. It didn't feel story like. It was stories, but, little journal entries or diary entry kind of vibes. Um,
Hmm.
but it's like, is this how you write in your diary? Because it feels so awkward compared to the way you would hear her speak. And anyways, this is not meant to be a deep dive of Ellen DeGeneres' memoir, but I was just thinking that parallel of, who you know, how you know them as celebrity, what you want to know about them, but then you just take their memoir and got to go with it.
Right. You would think their memoirs would be reflective of their
Mm-hmm.
personalities, right? When you
Yeah,
read Michelle Obama or Barack Obama's memoirs, like you kind of
exactly.
expect a certain writing style, a certain like intellectual level that they clearly live up to. And if you read something like
Exactly.
Born a Crime by Trevor Noah, like it's funny, it's
His commute
clever, it's
comedy.
it's comedy,
Mm,
yeah.
Yeah,
mm-hmm.
and
Yep.
and I also reviewed on this show Pamela Anderson's one of her books, and that was a surprise too, because again, like you said, Ram, you're expecting a certain something, based on what you've seen on screen, but the writing is completely different. In this case, it was a pleasant surprise, but I could see it going the other way, like you said, with the Ellen DeGeneres one there.
Okay. Final book slash author.
Final book slash author is Tan Tuan Ing. Um,
One more time.
Tan Tuan Ing, a very difficult name to say, but the books sound absolutely fascinating. He writes primarily historical fiction, and he primarily writes about the island of Penang. For me, I knew Penang was a dish, a Malaysian one. I didn't actually know it was an island, and had a rich history and culture. So I came across this on a National Public NPR interview, where they were interviewing this gentleman author, and it sounded fascinating for a whole lot of reasons. Primarily because the island of Penang has a whole bunch of cultures, and has had a bunch of cross culture for a long time. Originally Britishly ruled, but home to people from China, from Japan, from all those type of places, and all the sort of idiosyncrasies and things that come with culture, and where they meet. And all of his books have very fascinating titles, which I'm a sucker for a good title of a book. Um, and his latest book is not in the CELA collection yet, but there are other books in the CELA collection, including one called The Gift of Rain. I think the one that is not out yet on CELA is called The House of Doors. So intriguing titles, and I look forward to trying out one of his books.
How long is your to-do list for real? To read list? Because you often mention books that you will be getting into,
Mhm.
and then lo and behold, you actually get into them. It's not like many of us are like, yeah, gotta add that to my to-read list, and then next month we're talking about a whole different set of books.
I think some of us have to read lists and then like the actual to read list. You're just like,
Yeah,
this is
yeah,
for
yeah.
show, this is for real.
But Amer's pretty serious about his
I'm pretty
to-do
serious, and I
list.
think it's mood dependent, like a lot of people. So I have a rather long list, but there's some historical fiction in there. There's some memoir in there. There's some other pieces. One of the authors I tried out more recently, I had to abandon, which is very rare for me. Um, the book was called The Tusk That Did.
You want to tell us about that?
Sure, it was that did the damage. The author's name escapes me right now, but it was very much a first-person account, um, uh, of a baby elephant, and it's supposed to be three different sort of perspectives on poaching. But it was the human narration and the author's words were far too real. I mean, it's just, yeah, it hits way too close to home in a lot of cases. So I had to put the book down, which is quite rare for me. I'm like, okay, this is too heavy. I will have to skip this author.
Do you make an effort to, when you finish a book and pick up a new one, to switch up genres, to read something easier, to read something a little lighter, if you just came off with something heavy?
Sometimes, I mean, I think it depends on how much I have the appetite for it. I mean, in the case of Lee Child, the first author we spoke about, like I said, I read book 24, and then I read pretty much 1 through 7 straight through. And then after book 7, I'm like, I can't do another one. I need to do something else, and do that. And, as we mentioned, I really enjoy the Eve Dallas series. I'll typically do those in doubles and then go on to a different genre from there.
Back to this author.
Tan Tuan Ing.
Thank you. Is he known for writing in English?
Yes, the books are in English. I think pretty much all of them, I believe, are human narrated on this in the CELA collection too. So that was a pleasant surprise. And we have a lot of American authors in the CELA collection, and of course, the New York Times bestseller list has all sorts of American titles. So I thought it would be refreshing to go and read something that's not from this part of the world.
Yeah, of course. Of course. Aamer, awesome. Jacob, anything else?
That's it for me. Aamer, thank you so much for joining us again.
Always a pleasure. Take care.
Fantastic. All right. So we've been exposed to 3 authors, 1 book, Lee Child, Patrick Stewart. We haven't really been exposed to Patrick Stewart, but we've been exposed to his memoir, and Tan Tuan Ing. So Aamer Khan will be back in about a month. We're kind of flip-flopping around between end of the month and start of the month with Aamer, but he will be back, and he's always given us a good think about the books he's read or about the books he's about to pick up. And that's it. This is the end of AMI audiobook review, at least this week's episode. We'll be back next time. Probably check in with our friends from the Center for Equitable Library Access and some more book talk. I am your host, Ramia Amadin, with co-host Jacob Szymanski and technical producer Nisreen Abdel Majid, who is back with us. We missed her. And until next week, happy audiobook listening.